In today's episode, we will be talking about the opioid epidemic, the current danger of fentanyl, and whether it's a real threat to our homes and schools. I will be talking with Jeri Skrocki from Hays Consolidated Independent School District about how her school district is addressing this issue. Our goal is to talk about fentanyl in a way that does not cause fear, because we want to create a safe space to discuss what we're seeing and then address what gaps we're seeing so that hopefully we can not only save lives, but also bring attention and resources to this issue that's facing our schools and our community. I did want to note that there is a trigger warning for today's episode because we're going to be talking about substance use and addiction. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest, Jeri Skrocki, the head of District Safety and Security for the Hays Consolidated Independent School District. She began her career with Hays County Sheriff's Office in 1989, working in several capacities, including managing the School Resource Officer program for the school districts in the counties that utilize full-time sheriff's deputies for school safety. She's an architect of Hays County's standard emergency response protocol for schools, and she's been lauded by the governor's office for her work in helping to coordinate a county-wide standard response protocol in Hays County. She was also included as a member of the governor's roundtable discussion team that evaluated school safety solutions following the deadly mass shooting at Santa Fe High School. In addition to serving as the supervisor of the Hays County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigations Division, she's also a master peace officer, a certified mental health peace officer, a certified expert in child abuse, and a TCOL instructor with a record of several hundred hours of teaching law enforcement trainers. Jeri, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So for those of you who aren't familiar with the opioid crisis, I did want to talk about a little bit about what's currently facing everybody when we talk about opioids. So opioids are a class of drugs that include prescription pain relievers like OxyContin, Vicodin, fentanyl, but they also include illegal drugs like heroin. And those prescription pain medications can be made legally or illegally. When taken for a short period of time for pain relief, like after a major surgery, and they're prescribed by a doctor for a specific person and they're taken as prescribed, prescription pain medications are generally considered pretty safe. For those people who maybe have to take opioids for a longer period of time for a chronic illness, they may have dependence on that medication. So if they were to stop taking that medication, they may have withdrawal symptoms from that. And they may also have tolerance to it, meaning that if 5 milligrams provided pain relief and you took that amount for a long period of time, in order for you to still have that same level of pain relief, you may have to go up to 10 milligrams or 15 milligrams. But that's not necessarily the same as addiction. So we now call that substance use disorder, but addiction encompasses several other things that there's a clinical diagnosis for that. But for some people, it can be a pretty slippery slope for taking a medication as prescribed to go down into the course of addiction. They could be genetically predisposed. They may have difficulty obtaining the scripts, or their doctor may cease writing that prescription for them. And so then they'll go the easier route of either obtaining that illegally on the internet, or sometimes even going to heroin because it's easier to obtain it that way. So it's not that all of these drugs are bad. They have a place, but we just have to be careful about their potential for addiction. How this opioid crisis that we're going to be talking about today arose is that there was aggressive campaigning by drug companies to doctors, and they said that this was not addictive at all. And then concurrent to that, pain relief and treating pain was emphasized as the fifth vital sign. So that led to an increase in prescriptions that were being written. So now we have all of these prescriptions that were written. Jeri, I don't know if you remember, but I remember growing up when I was going to the dentist for something minor like a cavity, I would get a prescription for Vicodin for that. Did you have the same sort of experience? And I would get 20 pills. And oftentimes I would fill the medication, but I wouldn't take it because I didn't need it. Or sometimes I wouldn't take it. Well, now there's all these medications that are easy to access. They have flooded the market. They're being either sold on the black market or people are using them for recreational purposes. And so then when we understood as a community that these are addictive, there was a quote unquote crackdown by the government regarding prescriptive practices. And that drove people to find alternative medications, whether that's online with the advent of the internet. We can now get everything online. And then there was the influx of heroin because, again, it was being able to be accessed at a lower price point. So fentanyl is now something that has brought a lot more attention because it's a very small amount that can produce a really high level of euphoria, pain relief, a high. And so as little as, a few grains of salt can be a deadly amount of fentanyl. And actually, it is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. So because it's so small, it's easier to transport, easier to distribute, easier to smuggle, and it can be mixed with other drugs like methamphetamine because it takes very little, again, to produce that high. People often don't know that they're taking fentanyl because it's manufactured to look like legit medication. So it's manufactured to look like oxycodone or Vicodin or Xanax, and people are thinking that they're taking that drug, but it's important to remember that people are creating this from other countries in their garage. We don't know what's in it, and that's the danger of it. So unless it's something that was prescribed to you by a doctor that you picked up from the pharmacy and you are taking it exactly as prescribed, you really don't know what's in it. And per the Centers for Disease Control, 4 out of every 10 pills that contain fentanyl contain a potentially lethal dose, and 99% of fentanyl overdoses are accidents. So, Jeri, what are you seeing in Hays CISD related to the opioid crisis, specifically fentanyl?
So it really started last school year for us. We experienced one of our students having an episode on campus that required us to respond through our nursing team and our school resource officer to a classroom where ultimately we discovered that we had a student who was in the throes of a what we believe was a fentanyl poisoning overdose type situation that required us to administer Narcan. In order for that child to be responsive and be brought back. That very quickly brought that crisis into the school system. We were about to break for the summer, and it's very frightening to think about that experience in a controlled setting, but seeing our students who were about to be home and oftentimes going to be unsupervised or having a lot more freedom, and more importantly, no resources available to potentially be there in the event something like that happened. So when that occurred, we decided that we at least need to be very transparent as a school district. And we put out some public service information both to our students as well as our parents to warn them about what we saw on our campus population. And so that's really where it started, was at the end of that school year in dealing with really just that first foray into what occurred on a campus.
So you mentioned that they were in the throes of this and that this was something that was new. So talking about opioid use and the dangers associated with opioid use, what are the signs of an opioid overdose?
So one of the things that we really wanted, and we hear from a lot of people, is what do I need to look for? And so where we went with that is, well, you know what, that's a legitimate issue. So when we started, diving off into this, we wanted to make people aware of what to look for. So one of the things is that we really are trying to train our faculty, our students, our staff, our parents about things, a marked change in behavior, something that's not normal for your particular friend or family member. They're withdrawing from things that they normally like. You'll see they're almost that lethargicness that we oftentimes typify that we see in teenagers and go, oh, they're just tired or they've had a long day. But it's sustaining. It's something that's just lasting. It's not normal. It's not, I'm just having a sleepy day. It's just a constant lethargic type. Labored breathing, when you start seeing more and more of those issues. You can even start seeing where we're starting respiratory distress. You might see that blue tint. They're having difficulty breathing. They're sleeping and you're not able to rouse them. That's something that we're really looking for in the classroom setting. Students who are unresponsive, they won't get their head up off the desk. You ask them to sit up. Most kids, if they fall asleep or get sleepy, you can tap them on the shoulder, call them out. They'll waken, etc. But what we see in these students that we've experienced is they're going right back to that point. And so that's what our goal is really to kind of have people recognize those things. Parents and friends know that significant other best. And when they see that change in behavior, that's got to be that marker, and that, hey, there's something going on, and I need to have that engagement piece. I need to talk, and I need to start trying to figure out what's going on.
So what is the threshold between maybe a child abusing opioids versus there's an overdose? What are the sign differences that somebody needs to be aware of and pay attention to?
So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, anybody that goes unconscious, the labored breathing, if you start seeing the blue tint around their faces, really that unable to arouse, they're not being coherent.
Okay.
Those are the things that we are immediately going to be. If someone's can operate and stand on their own, et cetera, we may escort them to a nurse for an evaluation. But that person who's in that type of position, where they're unresponsive oftentimes, and that can happen so fast. You think that everything's good, and then the next thing you know is this person is just so sleepy and so tired you can't get them up. And it's those symptoms that are really the ones where we entering the danger zone, that we have to get them immediate medical attention.
So what should somebody do if they suspect that their friend or a student has overdosed or is overdosing on an opioid?
The immediate need is to get EMS or calling 911 and getting somebody there to help you as soon as possible. In our situation, we have our school nurses and our law enforcement officers on campus, so we're going to simultaneously be doing that. That may mean contacting those folks so that they can get to a classroom or get to an area of the campus. Those two things are going to be huge. In the event you don't have, a nurse or an SRO, it's really about calling 911 so they can talk you through the steps of what to look for and how can you help this individual until help can get to you. So those are the big issues, is really doing that. One of the things that we're also going to, look for is try to converse with that person. What did you take? Tell me what you took. Do you still have it on you? Those things. Because if we can get that knowledge quicker, we can give that to emergency first responders to get them the help and the appropriate help. So that's our goal, is to try to talk to them and then also get them immediate medical attention. Certainly what we want to do is in a school setting too, is we want to give them that privacy so that we can treat that issue. Because there's a lot of baggage that goes with that when you're having an episode in front of other students. Absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about Narcan? Some of us have heard about it, but maybe don't exactly know what it is.
So Narcan is basically the ability to hopefully just counteract the effects of a fentanyl poisoning. And so what that is a drug administered. What we utilize is the nostril administration. So what we're going to do is take that Narcan dose and we're going to put it into that individual, hoping that it will relieve the effects of that particular overdose. There's no adverse effects if that's not a fentanyl overdose. But what we've seen is that is a successful way to help counteract the effects of a fentanyl poisoning. The issue often in what we're seeing now is that traditional doses, which would be one dose, is not enough to successfully counteract the fentanyl poisoning by the sheer strength. And so we're finding that we have had to administer multiple doses in some situations in order to get the same success with that one dose because of what we're dealing with now.
And it's important for them to go to the hospital after the Narcan is administered, right? Because
100%, and I think that's the thing that's frightening on a global level, is that I think people tend to feel a little bit more confident that, oh, okay, I have a Narcan, a dose of Narcan. One, we want people to understand is that first and foremost, Narcan can wear off. We don't know what type of dose, what you took. You have to seek medical attention because you don't know what the continuing effects may be. And then on top of it, what we want people to understand is, if you're by yourself, it's oftentimes too late because you have already succumbed to those symptoms and you're not recognizing and realizing that you need to do that. You can't self-administer Narcan to yourself when you're unconscious. In talking with law enforcement, one of the things that we're also hearing and seeing is that Narcan is in the home where someone has overdosed. But they didn't recognize that they were at risk and were unable to administer what could potentially be a life-saving medication.
Is Narcan available in all of the schools in your district, or how does that work?
Yes. So we have school-based law enforcement. Our SROs all have been issued Narcan. They work for the sheriff's office. They all have doses as part of their job. That's at our secondary campuses. But then what we also did is we networked with our doctor for orders, and we have Narcan on every one of our campuses and multiple doses for in the event of just what I discussed, is that we don't want to have just one dose available, so we have multiple doses on campus to administer if necessary.
That's great. So one of the things I hear a lot from young people is that they're hesitant to alert anyone to the potential that their friend has overdosed or taken an opioid of some sort, because they're afraid of the consequences of that. They're afraid that either they're going to bring attention to something that's not a big deal, or that they're going to get the law involved, and then there's going to be legal consequences or problems with their parents. Could you speak a little bit about what you tell young people or school district officials or law enforcement, how to address this with young people?
So I think there really are two different questions there. I think the first one, first and foremost, is nobody wants to be a tattletale. No one wants to get a friend in trouble. And we all know that is probably going to change the course of that relationship. And so that's a very hard thing for anybody to really work through when someone that they've been friends with, they're saying and giving some of the most devastating news to friends and family. But the reality is that living with the potential of I should have, I could have, and finding out that person did experience a fentanyl overdose that resulted in the loss of their life, that's a really difficult thing for anyone to manage as an adult. Imagine dealing with it as a child. And when you're having to experience that, you're really going to have to understand that it may very well come down to that. Do you want to save their life, or are you willing to hope and pray that that's just going to coast and that they're going to figure it out? And those are hard questions, I think, for anybody to answer. And then the other piece of that, and really, is looking at from a personal perspective, am I ready to accept what somebody is telling me and saying to me? And sometimes it's a very difficult thing. So when we do see that and we do recognize that, our goal is not to criminalize that behavior. When someone is seeking help, our goal is to help them. I don't want to arrest people, and neither does the sheriff's office, and that was a big part of the collaborated effort that we had, is meeting with our district attorney's office, meeting with our area judges, local law enforcement, and our school district, and saying, how do we get our kids educated about this danger and how do we help them? And so at the end of it, somebody who's taking these types of drugs for personal use, when we locate that, that's a very different story than the person that's dealing it. When you have, because I will tell you, we will cooperate with law enforcement. We want to stop the flow of drugs. We'll arrest you if you're a dealer. Personal use, you're asking for it. Parents are calling us and saying, I found this in my child's room. Our goal when we're dealing with undeveloped brains of our teens is really trying to get them the help and educating them on that and not criminalizing that behavior. And it's a juggle. I mean, it really is. You may deal with someone who's not supportive, doesn't have a good home support network, or a law enforcement officer who says, I've been to this house multiple times, and so it really is. I mean, every call and every situation is different. But our goal is really for that outreach and that education piece, and really trying to get those referrals to the appropriate, agencies and treatment facilities and counselors, and that's really where we're at right now with dealing with some very difficult challenges.
Absolutely. And it's maybe talking to young people and saying the most important thing right now to focus on is keeping that person alive. And then everything else is secondary. Yes, there may be consequences down the road, but the number one thing is them staying alive and getting attention to keep that person alive. What are some of the things that you have done and that you're doing to bring that awareness and education at Hays Consolidated Independent School District?
So I feel very lucky that we have such a close relationship with our local agencies. We have, we work with the sheriff's office. They're in our schools as our school-based law enforcement. We also have a very close relationship with Kyle and Buda PD. But what we saw with Kyle is really an uptick in these experiences within the Kyle community. And Kyle PD was really responding to several of these. And then we started learning many of our students were being dealt with as well. We ultimately had multiple students who passed away during the summertime, and they were suspected fentanyl poisonings. Very quickly, we realized this has become an epidemic. One tragedy, now we're in a situation where we need to address those things. And so what we did is collectively as a group, I networked with the police chief, Chief Barnett, with Kyle PD, and really started thinking about, and we started hearing from parents, what are you doing to help with the program or to help with this problem? And we're educators. And so very quickly it was like, well, how can we educate people? That's what we do. So we started thinking about what that looked like. And so that message really came down to, let's look at some of that messaging. How can we effectively get to folks? Let's face facts. Teenagers don't watch the news. Oftentimes parents are too busy to watch the news. That outreach effort. We know social media is oftentimes where people train their attention. Facebook is very much an adult thing now, and it's not a kid thing. Where are some of the other areas that we can approach? So we thought about different venues, and that's where we came up with our Fighting Fentanyl series, where we wanted to do some of that video messaging. And then really we have some captive audiences in our schools, so we can make some of these mandatory so people can watch. We wanted to keep it local and utilize our people. We wanted them to see our uniforms and our, and our victims, because that's what they are. They're a victim to this pandemic, or epidemic, excuse me. So we came up with some posters. We really started connecting with our local law enforcement, our judges. We collectively said, what can we do as a community? And then we have a very deep connection when you start talking about over 20,000 students, all of those students with their emails and their connection, as well as all of their parents and anybody who subscribes to getting notices from the district. Couple that with hits on our website and a lot of that education piece. And we have a lot of outreach, and it's very local concentrated outreach. And so our goal was 100% to do those things and really stand in front of our community with representatives from EMS, from the school district, and from local law enforcement and say, we're standing in front of you. We're committed to combating this. And so really it was the alliance of all of those entities and the public messaging, which is where we were pushing hard to get the message out there.
And one of the things that I really appreciated too was your superintendent and some of the letters that he sent home. It was very fact-based. It wasn't alarmist. It was, this is what we're seeing. This is what you can do. It was very transparent. I know you did some public addresses as well to bring awareness. And you mentioned that there was some criteria that you had for that with involvement and who was speaking. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. Well, so Dr. Wright has a true gift. He is an incredible communicator, and he recognized immediately we have to do something. And that's, there are some people who I don't want people to know that we had this situation in a campus. That's not Hays CISD, and I love to say that really that's what we have in Hays County with all of our school districts. But one of the things that we see in these types of events, is oftentimes people want to help. But what we were seeing is everybody wanted kind of their time in front of a camera. They wanted that recognition. We didn't want this to be political. We wanted it to be 100% committed to the message. I think sometimes when we have that media piece and, we're really trying to do that public education, there are many people who want to come out and say, yes, this is part of my cause, et cetera. And as much as the political or the position can help, it's not what we wanted to utilize in our message. We wanted our message to be 100% just filled with the facts and the information. We didn't want an individual to be introduced by their party or their position and basically say, this is what I'm doing towards that. That's a very personal situation that you can do on your time or in that situation. But our goal was 100% to not have introductions of all of these different people there. We wanted to stick to what the problem was and how we needed to address it as a community. And so we made it very, very clear that our education pieces, when we had people come in to speak and all of those things, were not surrounded by any type of agenda or potential agenda. We didn't want anybody to perceive it like that, because then if I give this person an audience, then I'm faced in an information with this particular individual. So we spent time vetting any presentations that we have. We keep records of those presentations, what schools are getting offered, because we really want to make sure that we're being equitable across our district to ensure that all of our schools are getting that appropriate messaging.
What are some of the gaps that you're finding that exist?
Oh, wow. The biggest gap is as educators and as school counselors where we're seeing these issues, our biggest issue is recognize the problem, right? And then when we have people outreach and do those things, but we're a conduit to a connection. A school counselor is not someone who is trained and has the time or the resources to be able to do long-term substance abuse counseling or deal with the issues when you're talking about drug addiction. They're really a conduit to get that person into that introduction or in that program or that awareness so that they can get into the right fit. And the problem that we are seeing, and really that's coming from talking to parents and pediatricians, our medical professionals, is the lack of programs specific to substance abuse. And then when you couple that with substance abuse involving juveniles, there's just so little out there. Wait lists are catastrophic. Insurance comes into play. There's just the resources are not there. And so we're now hearing from parents who are saying, hey, you guys did a great job, but who can I call to get my son help? Who can I talk to get my daughter into a program? And we don't have them. And so I'm hearing the frustration of, you guys have helped me, recognize that there's a problem. Even my child's recognized that there's a problem, but now what do I do? And I'll admit, there's been days where I've drove home in my car and the tears flow down my cheeks, because I can't imagine being a parent and knowing that there's an issue and there's a problem and there's the lack of resources. We're hearing the same thing. I'm hearing from districts and from other people in other states going, how did you do what you did? But they're experiencing the same issues. And I hear it from everybody that it's a problem. I'm just struggling right now to understand why we're not addressing it as a nation, quite frankly. Locally, it's I've recognized it, but from the state and the nationwide problem,
Yeah, it's not local to Texas. This is something that there is a shortage of providers and treatment centers, especially for adolescents and for children nationwide. And I did want to elaborate on that a little bit. So there was a shortage of providers even prior to the pandemic. There weren't enough mental health professionals getting into the field. There's a shortage of psychiatrists. And then you have the awareness with the pandemic that maybe there's a lot more issues than I realized, because now I have time and I'm with my family and I can see what's going on, or I'm with my spouse and I can see all of the problems that I was able to kind of ignore, sweep under the rug, or it just wasn't obvious to me because we're just so busy living and going and doing. So now we have that recognition, and there's more of us that are aware that there's an issue and we need help, and there's less providers. Part of that has to do with insurance, insurance reimbursement rates, and there's a whole bunch of other issues as to why there's not enough people going into these fields. But then with the pandemic and the increased stress and the virtual learning that's taking place and all of these other factors that are coming into play, both adults and children may seek to use substances as a way to cope with all of these additional stressors, because kids are no different than adults are. If we have a long day and we want something to unwind, or if we're really stressed out and we don't know how to manage it, we may turn to substances, and our young people are no different in being able to figure out ways to navigate that. So again, we've got more of this situation and awareness of the problem. I recognize I have a problem, I need help. And then you've alluded to this, but it's one thing for adults, it's another thing for juveniles. It's another thing too, whether you have insurance or not. If you don't have insurance, it's even more difficult. So we definitely need the resources and funding and attention to be out there as far as what is currently going on, the gaps that exist. We do know the legislature, at least in Texas, is aware of this, not only the opioid epidemic, but the mental health shortage. And there have been resources funding the shortage of mental health providers. But I think with the fentanyl and the opioid crisis, there's still so much more awareness that needs to take place and so much more funding that needs to take place. What are some of the things that parents can do to kind of help their child with coping with these stressors and coping with these things, and helping them talk with their child about the dangers of opioid use, even prescription or non-prescription, legal or illegal?
So, those are hard conversations for parents. You're probably going to be met with resistance by your kids. You think I'm going to do that. Kids get very angry. They get defensive. You have to push through that. As a parent, if you're noticing those things, you've got to call it out. You've got to look for those things. You have to engage in those conversations. And they're difficult conversations. I know, I have teenagers myself. With that, you have got to look for those signs and symptoms. You can't be in denial. Imagine denying that and then having to deal with the worst day of your life, which is discovering that your child has done something that they're never coming back from. But at the same time, we also know kids are very good at hiding things from us. So it's one of those things where you're going to really have to determine where's the parenting line and where's that friend. And I hear people tell me all the time, "Oh, I'm close. I'm friends with my child." This is this horrible thing that's happening and is killing our kids. Doesn't care about those things. It's taking advantage of those relationships. We live in an instantaneous society. Kids can get things instantaneously. They withdraw to their rooms. We write it off as teen angst and it's normal teenage behavior. But when we start seeing that marked change in differences of their behavior, a different friend group, something that they've been working on, they've been interested in, and all of a sudden that deviation from that normal behavior, it's time to have those conversations. It's time to watch the videos we have or get on the internet and really look at signs and symptoms and really start screening yourself, your family, and going, is this right behavior? And if it's not, do I now look at, do I need to go through my child's room? Do I need to go through my child's phone? Do I need to have my child drug tested? Those are hard conversations as a parent. No one wants to do that, but nobody wants to bury their child. So yeah, you may have a kid who's very upset with you. It's personal, and I can't tell you what to do or what not to do, but what I can tell you is counterfeit pills are real. And that's really what we're seeing. We're not dealing with the prescription bottle where we're pulling it out of and stealing it from grandma or or grandpa or mom or dad. These are counterfeit pills made in somebody's garage or coming across the border illegally. They're not chemists who are making these pills. These are pills that will kill you. And we see time and time again kids who are, well, I took half of it and there was no issue. So I took the other half. I had no idea. Well, that's because when they pressed it and they crushed it, right, most of the fentanyl ended up in the half of the pill that you didn't take the first time. Many people think, oh, well, these kids they're not intentionally taking fentanyl. Well, what we're finding is we're both sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing those kids that are taking a pill that they think is a Percocet or a Xanax because that's how it's been billed to them. It looks like it. You get on the internet and it looks exactly like a Xanax or a Percocet.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have other kids who are saying, no, I want fentanyl because it gives me a much better high. I mean, I like the way I feel. It's just so much more there for me. So we're seeing both sides of it. I hear people all the time talk about those things. And so one pill can kill.
Mm.
And we see that with the DEA outreach efforts, and we've seen it to the tune of 4 students have died in our school district over a very short period of time, and that doesn't take into consideration the number of students that we have had to address both within our schools where we have had to administer Narcan and we've had those kids transported, or we found out that they have engaged in that type of behavior outside of the school day. And we have those reports from our local law enforcement and our medical officials that our students are being in that type of environment as well.
And I think having these conversations proactively too. So even if your child isn't using, or you don't suspect that your child is using currently, preventatively and proactively, it's good to have these conversations ahead of time so that they're aware that, if somebody gives them a pill, that you need to be cautious when you're taking that. And if it were my child, I would probably advise them not to take any pill from anybody, that only from me or from the school nurse if I've given them permission, because you just don't know what it is. And even if it's somebody that you trust, they may honestly feel like that this is something that's legit. And so having those conversations ahead of time. And one of the things that my mom did for me growing up, and I'm showing my age a little bit here, but she understood that peer pressure that exists. And she said, Stephanie, if you're ever in a situation that is bad and you need to get out of it, first of all, I would call her mom. So she said, if you call me and you say, Mother, can I do X, Y, and Z? She knew that her answer was a no, because then you have your friends listening. They're right there. They can hear the conversation. So I'm not giving it away that I want her to tell me no. The other thing that she did that I thought was really helpful is, if you ever end up in a situation and you need me to come get you, if you call me and you have me come get you, there's no consequences. You're not going to get in trouble for doing that. And so I think that gave me that safety and security that sometimes we end up in situations that we thought were fine, and then all of a sudden we're like, this is not good. And I think that we don't talk enough about that, the peer pressure that exists. Even, in my mid-40s, there's still a lot of peer pressure, and I think we don't understand that this can impact all socioeconomic status kids, all school district kids, younger kids, older kids. This impacts all of us. Peer pressure does, and the opioid use and epidemic does. This impacts all of us. And so to have our head in the sand and think that our kids are strong enough to say no, our kids would never be in a situation like that. I don't need to have these conversations. They know better than that. That's very much head in the sand. Would you agree with that? Or?
Oh, absolutely. 100%. We have safe sex talks.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about alcohol. We talk about drinking and driving. This is no different. We have to sit down and have those conversations. One of the things we looked at was, how do we message for elementary schools? We talk about the rainbow fentanyl that's out that looks so much like, various candies. And so we looked at for some communication on how would we do this for the elementary schools, because we don't want to go overboard, but at the same time, that conversation needs to occur. And so there was nothing out there. We developed something. And really what we had is we put that together where we put it in our hallways where our kids can read, our 4th, 5th grade hallway, and in our nurse's office, so that we can have that. I'll share with you, we had an incident recently where we had elementary school kids on a bus, and one student asked another student if they wanted some medicine, just kind of unprovoked, and gave the other student some medicine, and described it as a white pill. And they didn't want to take it,
Mm-hmm.
but felt compelled with everybody sitting there that they wanted to. So what ends up happening, of course, is that they pocket it,
Mm-hmm.
and then tell mom when they get home, making it seem that they were, they were going along with it. It turned out it was a mint. It was a
Mm-hmm.
very small mint, and et cetera. But mom is like reported that to the school because that tells me some of the things that we're doing are working.
Mm-hmm.
And so that conversation is there, and we can never quantify when it works. We just have no idea if somebody made a conscious decision not to do something. We may not know that right
Mm-hmm.
away. We may not know the school setting. Parents that may get told later, they may tell a friend, but boy, knowing that particular piece from an elementary school level state was huge for me. And I was like, okay, so we're getting through,
Mm-hmm.
and that made a big difference.
So, in addition to having these proactive conversations, some of the things I think that parents maybe could be aware of and educate their children about, or things that they need to think about and have conversations with their spouse about. Um, Maybe it's talking to the doctor if they're being prescribed a medication about the benefits versus the risks of being prescribed that medication for their child. Talking about prescription misuse. So it may not even be opioids or fentanyl specifically. It may be about the importance of only taking medication that's prescribed to you, and then modeling that behavior. Is that something that you have found is something that's important in Hays CISD?
Nothing that we've developed on our end, but I think what you're talking about is extremely important. I mean, the control of narcotics in your home, making sure that those are under lock and key, that you're holding accountable. Don't hold on to old medications.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all guilty of leaving medications that we don't finish the entire bottle in the prescription. We may not even look at it for years, but it's still there. We have to be responsible for
Mm-hmm.
those types of activities, and I think that's a very real message we're seeing. There's oftentimes those drug collection points and things like that, disposing of those medications. We just don't think about it. You have a family member who passes away, and you still have that room or those medications. You have to have that control piece, and it goes back to time and time again, reminding our kids that those are the expected behaviors. But we all know kids know better than
Mm-hmm.
us, and so it's a continual reminder. As parents, as educators, we all have the responsibility of guiding those kids. I mean, it takes a village,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really personal accountability for all of us to look out for our children, and make sure they're not engaging in that risky behavior. But we also want to create friends and stewards of safety for their peer groups. We
Mm-hmm.
want empower our kids to look out for each other, and it's really what part of our outreach is geared towards, is looking towards that, and we're really trying to do that with some of our peer-to-peer groups as well.
So, some of the resources that you've created that you've mentioned, can anybody access those, or is that just for Hays school districts?
No. So actually, we just talked about this. One of the things we've created a video series, and we're trying very hard to do those locally. We have them on our page. We're also going to be putting them on YouTube. We're encouraging anybody to utilize any of our posters, any of our video series. By all means, we just, we certainly want you to add to the beginning or the end. We want people to utilize what we have out there. Our goal is any child that can watch or save, or family member. That's 100% what we're committed to. Fentanyl doesn't stop in Hays County.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on down to Travis County and Comal and Guadalupe County, and it's going to take all of us to fight this. Anybody that can find any use for any of our materials, please, please, please. And we ask you find something as well, share it down. We'll put it on our fentanyl page and just as easily utilize that.
And where can they locate these resources?
So on our Hays CISD page, actually on our homepage, you will, if you scroll down towards the bottom, there's a Fighting Fentanyl link, and it has all of our resources, including all of our videos. We will be putting the videos as well on YouTube, so you'll be able to just search fentanyl and Hays CISD, and all of them will pop up. As of right now, we have 3 published. We're about to release a 4th, and then we have a 5th one on deck to finish up. And those are really geared towards our local issues.
Mm-hmm.
And they have, they have our staff, they have our students, they have our parents who've maybe experienced this firsthand. And what we've heard from our kids over and over again is they need that personal connection. They don't want an adult just talking at them. And so we even staffed this program with our student leadership team, and they're working on outreach efforts on a peer-to-peer type of connection on the apps that us adults don't really know a lot about, but they do. And so they're helping us package the message in alternative formats for us.
Yeah, TEA, I know, also just released a fentanyl toolkit. And I'm just going to list a couple of the resources really quick so that anybody listening, if you want to access these resources, in addition to your school district homepage, on TEA's website, there is student staff health resources regarding fentanyl. Also, schoolmentalhealthtx.org/fentanyl-awareness-prevention/ also has some great resources, including treatment centers and things that are available, that we know are available, but there probably is a very long wait list for those. Is there something that we haven't talked about today that you would like for people to be aware of?
It's not so much aware as we have a situation. We all came together and during COVID. I remember after 9/11 seeing that the community, for some reason, when it comes to drug use and drug abuse, I struggle with the messaging that I see and oftentimes hear amongst individuals. It's not uncommon for me to look on social media when there's a posting about somebody who has overdosed or maybe lost their life, and I see immediately people challenge parenting. They indict the family. They indict the network. They indict. You must be a bad parent. It is very, very disheartening to see how we can support each other in all these other tragedies, but we're not kind, and we say hurtful, awful things when we can hide behind a keyboard. No one knows what a family is experiencing. I can tell you firsthand in talking to some of these families and in my law enforcement career, drugs hit everyone, and addiction is addiction. And when you're sitting behind a keyboard and you're slamming parents, and you're being hurtful and doing those things in school when somebody comes back to school after experiencing one of those events and they're ostracized, it's very hard to share that experience. It's very hard to change. People don't want to come forward because of what is going to be said about them. It's easier to just keep it a secret than for people to know that I went to rehab or those things. And I really just caution people to remember it takes so little to be kind. And until you walk in that person's shoes, you truly don't know what they're experiencing, what anxiety, what angst, what trauma, what their personal issues are. And we've got to stop sniping, and we've got to start realizing that collectively we're not going to combat this until we come together to challenge it. And I don't know any way to say that and to convince people other than to just beg, and really remember that until you've walked in somebody's shoes, you have no idea what they're going through. I know I've heard time and time again people say, if only they had reached out when you're talking about somebody who took their life. I had no idea what they were going through. We say that all the time. I'm going to ask you to just apply that in this situation as well, because they're playing Russian roulette with their life. What they're doing is almost actively engaging in that type of risky behavior that can lead to your death. We talk all the time about, I wish I had just known, and reach out. So I'm asking you to reach out. Recognize those signs, symptoms, and I'm asking you to reach out. Be that confidant that that person may need. Or you know what? Be that person who calls them out on it, and maybe they're not ready to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
But keep being that squeaky wheel. At some point, they may hear you.
Absolutely. And I think that I love how you talk about that, because oftentimes we feel so isolated and alone that only I'm going through this. And so it drives people underground. I don't want to talk about what it is I'm experiencing from a parent standpoint, right? I don't want to reach out and tell anyone that my kid is suffering or my kid has a problem with substances, because then either my kid is going to be targeted or I am. And so that it just drives everybody underground. And the reality is that all of us are experiencing the same things or very similar things. You are not alone. There are a lot of people out there experiencing the same thing. And when you do talk about these things and you get connected to help, there's that support that's there. There's some scaffolding that's there. There's some resources that are there. I know and I understand that we play the blame game and we talk about like the reason that this happened is because X, Y, and Z. You're a bad parent. You weren't paying attention, or your schools didn't have a plan in place. That's why this happened. And it comes from a place of control. We want to feel like we have a sense of control over our situation or our family or our children. And so we blame and we put a reason why it happened to everyone else. And so I think it's also good for us to end on that this can happen anywhere. Our eyes need to be open that this is prevalent, this is around, and it's not something that any of us are immune from. And so, like, let's talk about this. Let's bring that awareness and the education, and maybe we can save some lives with this, but also bring the resources that are so desperately needed to treat this epidemic.
100%.
Jeri, thank you so much for joining me today in the Learning Lab studio. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your experience with us. Thank you for everything that you're doing in Hays CISD and beyond to educate people about the opioid epidemic. To the listeners, I hope that you are leaving here with a deeper understanding of the dangers of opioid use, specifically fentanyl, and then ways to educate our young people about this concern. On our next episode, we will explore anxiety. So is anxiety something that we all experience, or is it a mental illness? Thank you for joining us in our mission to prepare today for a safer tomorrow. Thank you, Jeri.
You're very welcome.